In Stardew Valley, every choice you make is permanent. When you go to bed at the end of a digital day, every choice you make is locked in. While you may be able to undo your decisions, you undo them in real time. But the choices you made that day don't change, your response does. Stardew Valley forces you to look forward and plan the next day, because each day, much like real life, is permanent. But this calls into question the different realities created by permanence. Sure, when the next day comes, you can choose to undo everything you did before. In Stardew Valley, you could decide to tear apart your crops and give yourself a blank slate. In that way, the result of your choice is impermanent. However, while that result of the choice is impermanent, it comes at a consequence. The time and money you invested into that choice goes away. Every choice you make is permanently ingrained into the story of your life and your digital farm. It's strange that sometimes it's a video game that reminds us of that. Ultimately, consequence is permanent, but outcomes are impermanent. For instance, some days I'll wake up and decide I didn't like what I wrote the day before, or I didn't like the concepts I programmed into a game, and I could delete chunks of those. When I wake up, sometimes I have a different vision, a different idea. The outcomes of my choices the last day are impermanent, but the consequences are. My choices don't stop existing, they become a part of that thought process and part of that crucial development process, even though they don't make that final product. When I hear often that we learn from our mistakes, it's a perfect reminder that mistakes are permanent, because they have to be, or we don't grow from them. But we don't just learn from our mistakes, we learn from making choices. We learn from talking to people, doing research, reading, listening. And as our worlds become increasingly digital, and we seem to pursue objectivity, I think we tend to forget the art and beauty of impermanence. Maybe the scariest part of life is that it just keeps going. And because it keeps going, you are constantly, second by second, going into something unpredictable. You never know if you're going to wake up one day and your legs stop working. I really mean that part. We never know what the future is going to look like, and it's worrying to think that the things we enjoy in our lives are impermanent. I still remember playing Super Mario Galaxy with friends growing up, enjoying that moment, but not really processing that life moves forward. And that inevitably means the moment we're living in isn't permanent, even though the memories and consequences of that time are. But the thing is that unpredictability has two real consequences. One, it reminds you that there are things outside of your control, and in some way that's almost euphoric. It means you don't have to get everything right, you just need to be able to adapt when the moment comes. But it's also a reminder that when things happen, they will have always happened. For example, if you spill a bunch of oatmeal on the ground when making breakfast, there's never going to be a time, any point in the future, where you haven't spilled oatmeal onto the ground. It just becomes inconsequential about 5 seconds after it happens. Because you can adapt next time and realize you can't just grab the jar of oatmeal from the lid, you actually have to grab it underneath from the actual jar. You learn from those moments. Now, that's an oddly specific and inconsequential example, but that concept of permanence has encompassed a lot of popular media recently. In Severance, Mark's wife Gemma passes away. permanent and consequential event that Mark cannot simply move past, so he undergoes the severance procedure, creating a branch of himself that doesn't feel that same pain. The grief of his wife dying becomes theoretically impermanent because it does not perpetuate through the splintered version of himself, in theory. And frankly, the consequence of this is insubstantial, at least in regards to Mark's grief, because his outer self still experiences that grief in the same way. He doesn't get the benefits of this new impermanence as outie Mark. The point being, again, that when something happens, it will have always happens. With time, we heal, we move on, we adapt, but ultimately all those things that happen to us still will have happened. In my mind, impermanence and imperfection go hand in hand. Nothing is stagnant, and in a way, that means nothing is ever truly settled. Impermanence creates moments. Moments create stories. Stories create conflict, and conflict demands resolution. In Bo Ruberg's spectacular book, Video Games Have Always Been Queer, he introduces the concept called the queer art of failure. In very broad terms, the queer art of failure refers to the moments in a game where you don't succeed. Your failure creates its own narrative, one deeply rooted in subversion, the very nature of queer arts. I think this is most visible in the game Celeste. Celeste, a game about anxiety, naturally implies worry that things will go wrong, but the game also offers a promise that despite that worry, you can do this. When you fail in Celeste, there's no real penalty, only that you have to try again. In order to succeed, you end up showing yourself the ways that you can fail. You create your own narrative from failure. Those moments where you didn't make it reflect that feeling of anxiety. If the goal of the game is to win, Celeste tells its most personal story, a story of self-doubt through failing your goal. And that failure is also the true nature of impermanence. Those moments where you didn't make it don't just go away, but they do pass, and you learn and adapt from them. Anytime you make a jump in Celeste, any jump, you are proving to yourself that failure is not permanent, but is part of the journey to success. So those fond memories you look back on, those impermanent moments, they aren't just a luxury, they're a necessity. As Carrie Heater said at the Meaningful Play Conference in 2022, in the game of life, the person who has the most meaningful experiences wins. You cannot win without failure, and you cannot move forward with permanence. Theoretically, the ideal world is one where we all fail, and sometimes it's a video game that reminds us of that. One of the most devastating parts of human existence is that no matter how many times you restart or rewind Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker is always going to end up being Darth Vader. Now, I'm not pointing out something radical here. I mean, 4 movies prior, Darth Vader practically tells Luke, yeah, by the way, I'm Anakin Skywalker, your dad. But it's also not radical to say that the story of a movie doesn't change just because you rewind or restart it. But what's fascinating to me is that the story of a game can and does change when you restart or rewind it. Rewinding, in this case, is more like reloading from a previous save file. But ultimately, if I play Breath of the Wild twice, I've created 2 different stories of Link saving Hyrule, based on the actions I chose for Link to take. Of course, the embedded narrative of the game cannot change. The cutscenes aren't going to be different. Ganon isn't just going to randomly say, nah, I'm good, and leave halfway through. Link has to accomplish the same goal to defeat Ganon. But still, what's fascinating here is that the emergent story is different. There's an emergent narrative defined by our actions as a player, not just in Breath of the Wild, but in every game. What we choose to do, how we explore, those things impact this emergent narrative. If, say, I'm playing Celeste, there's a story being told from something as literal and simple as I started here, I tried to get over there, and after failing a few times, I eventually got there. The player's action in any game creates its own narrative. Breath of the Wild just happens to be a very clear example of this. When the game tells you to go, you can go anywhere. While the environment design will try to subtly lure you towards Zora's domain, ultimately you make countless decisions from this point on, forming countless different stories about your adventure in Hyrule. You complete different divine beasts, find different memories, discover different Koroks, climb up different mountains, cut down different trees, offend different chickens. That's your own emergent story. I bring up the concept of emergence because it goes hand in hand with impermanence. And it's relatively simple because emergence and impermanence both relate to the idea that nothing is fixed. A movie will happen the same way every time, unless you're watching something like Clue. But ultimately, a movie's story is permanent. Even if it fades into obscurity, nothing changes. With a game, every choice you make ends up feeling impermanent because you can simply reload the game and change your story or your actions or your choices. Now, what's also interesting are the games that build in the capacity to rewind embedded within the narrative. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, your character possesses the in-universe ability to literally rewind a battle. Now, on a surface level, this is a bit confusing. Why bother to rewind when you can just reload a save, close the game, and open it back up again? The complication here, of course, is that Fire Emblem employs a permanent death system. When a character dies, they stay dead, and the entire embedded content of the game will change as a result of that death. So when a character dies, the story of the game compels you to keep moving forward. Sure, you can just reload an old save, but ultimately now you aren't just undoing the emergent choices that led to the character's death, you're undoing the embedded story of that character dying. Fire Emblem turns impermanence on its head and hits it with a shovel. You can rewind the game, in-universe, and change the outcome. So the consequences of a bad move is a character dies, but the outcome canonically is often the character living. Again, the consequences are permanent, outcome is impermanent. And I think this is pretty interesting, because Stardew Valley compels you in a similar way, albeit with much lesser stakes and consequences. Your character is not just going to permanently die. But like I said at the start, at the end of each day in Stardew Valley, every single outcome of the previous day is permanent. You cannot go back to a previous save. You cannot go back to a previous day. You can't just hit an undo button. Once you do something, it's been done forever. In that way, the game reflects our lives, each moment actually passing as we go. And that phrase is interesting too, each moment actually passing as we go. There's implied permanence and impermanence to that statement. It means everything we do becomes fixed to time, permanent. But it also means each moment passes, so the very moment we're living in is impermanent. I think in that way, impermanence isn't the antithesis to permanence, but rather that each operate through each other. There's a lot of beauty to that. The fact that every moment moves on and we're constantly hurtling into new experiences. Sure, it's scary. Change is scary. The unpredictability is scary. But still, we find paths forward. We make connections. We experience life. We're never trapped in a moment. But still, through that impermanence comes the lasting memories that we make. The things we hold on to, things we learn from, things we grow from. We grow from the moments we move past. We are what we grow beyond. The moment we live in changes, but we change to meet it. What does this mean? It means you're ready for what comes next. You don't have to be scared over the future because just by living, you're equipped for it. Even if you wake up one day and you randomly can't walk, it's okay. Each day as it comes, adapting, learning, discovering, you got this. But just because the resources are available to us doesn't mean we don't still have to prepare. We have the ability to adapt, but we have to choose to do so. We can make this impermanent moments a part of our permanent lives. I think it's pretty cool that we can't all agree on the meaning of life, but we can all agree that life is meaningful in some way. At least some part of this world we live in is important. If you ask me, one of the most important parts of life is making it better for the people around us. Even just a little more inviting, a little more caring, a little more accepting. We have to, because as each moment passes, we keep moving forward. We can hold each other up as we make those steps. And sometimes it's a video game that reminds us of it.